Hey guys, this is Fred from Petri Games, and this is episode 5 in how to build an agar.io clone using Photon Fusion and Unity. In this episode we'll go through how to host your servers like a pro using Unity Cloud servers. To enable Multiplay, log into your Unity dashboard, and I already have a project for this, agar clone, but I'm going to create a new one. So let's go and create a project, and we'll call it agar clone example. And then we just wait a bit until Unity has created this project for us. Okay, so now we have our project set up, and what we'll do is go into Multiplayer and then press Setup Multiplay. So this will take a little bit of time, so I will pause the recording and I'll get back when it's done. So now it's all done, and we can get started with integrating your game server. Now, since we're using Unity, it's fairly simple. Just select Unity as your engine, and then connect your project through the Unity engine, go into Edit and Project Settings, and then you hook it up to this project. And then you hit next, and then select what version you're going to use. So we're on 2021 or later, so that's easy. Then use the package manager and add this package, the com.unity services multiplay, and then hit finish. So now that setup is done, let's go to step 2, where we create a build. And this is a little bit different from your regular build. It's actually not the build that you get out. It's set up for the virtual server. So we're going to call it test, and it's only supported by Linux, and we're going to use a direct file upload. And then we have to wait a little bit, and then upload files. So we need to select our files which should be uploaded. And it says here, do not upload a zipped archive. So we need to upload all of the files. So let's go into Browse, Folder Upload. And I've already built a server for this. So let's go into Server Build Linux. So you need to build a standalone server using Linux. And then hit Upload and confirm with Upload here. And then hit the upload all of those files, and then we wait a little bit until they are all uploaded. And actually maybe we can hit next already and just have it upload in the background. So that's pretty cool. And then we have the summary, and we can hit finish. All right. It's not actually done, so let's leave it until it's actually done. So that was a nice try, but obviously we need to wait until all of the files are uploaded. All right, there we go, and then hit next and version 1. Okay, so that's cool. Then we have our build created. Then we need to have a build configuration. So let's hit create build configuration, and we are going to call this EU because my servers are going to be based on EU, and you can change it to US or whatever you want. And you need to have one of these build configurations per region that you want to support. And then let's just select our test build here. And then we need to select the query type, which is how sort of the game server is integrated towards the cloud service, so that it provides updates, etc. Luckily with Unity, this is sort of already integrated, so we can select SQP, and we will actually change our code a little bit to provide more features of it. And then we need to select our executable or a game server executable file. So that's going to be the file that starts. So where are we? We are, here we go. That's going to be our agar clone server.x86_64. And then we have some launch parameters. Our launch parameters, they are pretty good, the default ones, but we're gonna add one extra one. And this is to be able to tell Photon Fusion which region we are going to use. So in this case we need to provide that. So we need to tell Photon Fusion which region, and we're going to use the region EU. Alright, so let's hit next, and then next, and then we can select some information about our CPU and memory usage, which is sort of an indication of what you're going to use. You can actually use more, but it helps with the provisioning. So we can just leave it as defaults, and we'll see how much it actually will use. Then hit finish. Alright, so it's not synced. Our build is not synced, so we have to wait a little bit. Alright, there we go. So whenever you create a build and upload some files, it takes a little bit of time before it is actually synced with the server cloud. So you can actually, when viewing a build, you can see the status of it, but it doesn't really matter right now. So now we have created our build configuration. Now we need to create a fleet, and the fleet is sort of a collection of game servers. So multiple game servers are attached into a fleet, and that's just how they have selected to name it. So let's create a fleet, and we will call it test fleet. Oops, fleet. And it's going to be Linux, and we're going to use our EU test configuration here. And let's go to next, and then we need to select region. So what region are we going to use? We're going to use Europe, and then we need to supply how many servers are we going to use, the minimum number of servers. So we're going to use minimum 1 and maximum 1. So we're just going to use 1 for now. So let's hit finish, and then create test allocation. And let's select our fleet, our region, and build configuration, and hit next, and run test. So now we can see that, okay, it's starting to send the allocation. It's waiting for the servers to start. And I think this, no, actually, well, take some time. And let's just pause the recording, and I'll get back when it's done. So my test allocation is now done, and I can hit finish. So awesome. Now actually it's all done. We have done our setup, and we are actually ready to get started. So if we have a look at our servers, we can now see that we have a bunch of servers provided for us, and it's in the state allocated because we just did this test allocation. And if we leave it alone for this timer that expired 1 hour, then it's actually going to be in this available state. But now it's allocated, and allocated is sort of a way to indicate that it's ready to go. And you can have multiple allocated servers that allows you to start up, spin up more servers faster. But for now, let's go into the first server. And here we can provide then stop server, restart server, and now it's allocated, and it has actually started up. So we can look at our events and see, okay, server has issues with CPU or limit, which is fine. It happens when we are restarting as well, so it doesn't really matter right now. And we can look at our logs. And here we can actually look at our engine log, and we can see that, yeah, it looks pretty much like it does when we are starting up our regular Unity things. So it's all good. But if we would run this game now and connect to it, which we can without actually doing anything, then we won't get any metrics of how many users have connected and some other things because we have not integrated the SQP properly. So that's something we need to change in our code. And also right now it's sort of ignoring the build configuration that we provided with this EU part here because we haven't added it in our code. So that's what we are going to start now. So we're going to do the proper integration. But if you would connect to a server that is not in the status allocated but in the status running, then it would work. So here, if we press start server, it would then become available and you could connect. But this was just my example project, so we're going to change back into my real development project, which is this one, because this is the project that I've tested against, and I've set it up, and I already tested a few things here. One thing that is important to note is that you have your fleets, which I have here, my test fleet. And as you see, we have 0 servers. But if we go into our example project and press fleet, we can see that actually we have 7 servers and it's online. So if I would leave this like it is and just not do anything for a few days, it's going to cost money. So as soon as a fleet is online and it has servers allocated like this, that you can see that there's a list, then it's going to cost you money. Regardless if you're testing it or not. Luckily, when you're testing, you'll get some funds. If you look at this notification, you can see that you have received $800 in credits for this. But this is going to cost me money. So whenever I'm not going to develop for some time, and then it's important to go into your test fleet and change online and take fleet offline, which says like, okay, it will drain all the servers, so it will remove the servers. It will take some time when you're starting up and new players won't be able to join sessions. But we are testing, so we don't want it to be offline or online. We want it to be offline when we're not using it. So take it offline when you're not going to use it. So let's change our project again and go into my regular project. So this regular project has the exact same setup that we had before. But we're going to use this as the basis, as I don't want too many projects lying around either. Anyway, so now we are going to get back into Unity and actually integrate our SQP, so we can see that when a user is actually joining a server, that it actually ticks up, and we can see that, okay, one user has joined, etc. So let's go into Unity. Now, your project should have been linked if you followed the steps already, but if you didn't, here are the steps to link your project to your game services. So hit project settings. Oops, it came up on the other screen. Select your organization and hit use an existing Unity project ID, and then select that. And hit link project ID, and are you sure you want to link this? And yes, I am sure. And will this app be primarily targeted to children under 18 or 13? Just hit no, save. That's actually for ads. I'm pretty sure it's for ads anyway. And then we are done with that, and we can close this. Then we need to make sure that we've added Multiplay to our package manager. So let's go Window, Package Manager, and search for Multiplay. And it's good if we spell it correctly, Multiplay. And here we have Multiplay, com Unity Services Multiplay, and hit install. And wait for it to download and install. Then when it's done, let's just hit the X and close it. And if we look at our console, we're going to notice that we have an error. So if you clear, then this is going to remain. So if we look at what it actually says, it says multiple precompiled assemblies with the same name, WebSocket -sharp.dll is included on the current platform. And you can see that it's actually included in 2 locations with the same file, which is not allowed. So we have a Photon Fusion that is colliding with this. They are using the same DLL, which it can't. So we need to resolve this, which is a little bit problematic usually, because well, they are provided in the package, and if we remove them or change the settings, then it might get added right back in. But luckily there is a configuration for it. So let's go into our build settings, and we need to do this both for our client and our server, but let's start with the client. So Windows, Mac, Linux, and hit player settings. And all right, you didn't see that because it was off screen. All right, so the build screen looks like this, just a regular one. And hit player settings, and you'll come in here, and then just scroll down until we can find our defines. So script compilation, script defined symbols. So let's add a symbol, and then you need to write this exactly as it says here: wire_exclude WebSocket sharp. So that will force the Multiplay integration to actually not include this, and we don't need to include it because Fusion already has it. And then hit apply, and then shift to your dedicated server, and by pressing switch platform, and do the same thing, and change the player settings of that as well to include this wire exclude WebSocket sharp, and hit apply. So now we have changed the configuration here for our dedicated server and our regular, so we can see that it's there. And if we change into our dedicated server, it's there as well. So let's close that down, and let's actually switch over to our dedicated server, and it needs to be Linux. So then it's gonna need to recompile a few things. And just wait for it, and hopefully it's done soon. And once it's done, you can hit the switch platform button right here. So let's just imagine that it's done, and I've hit that button. And boom, we're done. So let's close that one and go into our project. And now we are going to start coding a bit. So let's go into scripts, create a new folder, and we'll call it Multiplay. And then let's create a new C# script, and we'll call it Multiplay Server Hosting Handler. Press enter, and then open it in Visual Studio. So this is going to be a singleton, so we're going to create it as a singleton so other scripts can access it. So let's do a public static Multiplay Service Hosting Handler, same as this, instance, and assign it to null. Then we need to check that it's actually started, or if there is an instance or not, because as a singleton there should only be one instance. So let's add our awake, and actually we need private because it's, well, already private if we don't write private. Then we are going to check, all right, is the instance null? If it is, then it's all good. Then it means that there is no instance, and it shouldn't exist when we are doing this the first time. So then we'll assign it to that. But if there is some type of instance already, then we don't need a new one. So let's, in that case, destroy this game object that we have started up for some reason, and then let's just return. But if this has not happened, then it means that we are actually have a new instance, and then we just need to add do not destroy on load on the game object. So this object will live forever. So there we go. Now we have created our singleton, and we can get on with our integration. So when we are starting up, we are going to change our start method here. So we're going to change it into async. So by saying that, okay, it's an async start, then it means that we can wait for a few things to ensure that they are ready and have executed. And the first thing we're going to do is this actually just needs to run on our server. So let's check that we are a server. So we're going to do this if Unity server. So this is a checking that we are compiled as a server, and in that case it's going to include this code, otherwise it's not going to include this code at all. And then the first thing we need to do is initialize our Unity service. So let's add that as a async task init Unity service, and then end brackets. So we have an error saying that the task could not be found, and that's because we need to start using tasks. So let's add using system threading.tasks, and that makes that error disappear, which is good. And then we actually need to just write our code, and let's add a try. So we are going to try to await Unity services initialize async. And again, we have this error because Unity service is not defined. So let's go up there again and add using Unity services.core. All right, so then we have removed that part. And then if there is some type of problem, we want to catch that. So let's add a catch with that exception, and then we can use our utils to write out what type of problem we had. So Unity services init failed with error, and then e.inner exception, and we can see once again it says that okay, we have exception is sort of not defined, and that's because we haven't added system. So let's go in and using system. Okay, perfect. So then we have that done, and if we have an exception, let's just return as well. And if we have then managed to reach this part, it means that we are done. Unity services init okay. So now we need to as well call this. So let's go into our start function here, and then we are going to await. So let's do await init Unity services. So this will make sure that it actually stays here and doesn't move on until this part is done. So once that part is done, we can set up our integration towards Multiplay. So let's add a variable for that. So we're going to have a I server query handler, and we just call it server query handler. So once again, we have our squiggly line problem, and it's because it's not defined yet. So let's add using unity.services multiplay. Okay, so then that resolved that problem. So once we have done our initialization of our Unity services, we can actually start up our server query handler. So let's do that, and hold on. So let's do await multiplayer service instance start server query handler async. And we can see that we have a bunch of variables that we need to provide, or parameters: max players, server name, game type, build ID, map. So for now we can actually hard code this. So let's say that we need a maximum of 10 players. We want the server name to be, it doesn't matter what it is, test. And the game type is going to be regular. The build ID is, it doesn't matter here either, test ID, test build ID, and then some map default, and there we go. So these parameters is not something that we need to use right away, and it doesn't really matter at this point what we are feeding it with. So once this has started up, it's going to assign this server query handler, and then we can start using it. So again, on our update function, we only want that to run if we are the server. So let's go and actually do it on the whole update, and we can actually do it here as well. We can move this outside of our start, so start doesn't even exist if we are the client. And hold on, we need to move that here. That's a little bit nicer. Then we won't have any sort of errors or anything like that, or warnings that we're, well, let's leave it at that. Okay, and then our update. So what we're going to check is we're going to see if our server query handler is ready, and if it's not null, then it means that we have actually started up our server instance. So we need to call this server query handler dot update server check. So that updates the information of the server and gets information back and forth. So you need to have that anyway. Perfect. Then we want to be able to supply information to our servers. How many players are playing? That's the first parameter that we are going to add. So let's add a method for it, or a function. Public void set current number of players, and it takes in a ushort, number of players, and ushort. The reason why we're doing that is because that's what Multiplay is using. So that's yeah, an integer is similar, but ushort cannot be negative. So that's the only difference. Then when we have sort of done that, we need to take our server query handler and dot current players and set it to the number of players. So by exposing a public function like this, we can access it from our other scripts. Then we want to start using this. So let's go into our assembly C# player, and let's find our network and network spawner. All right. So our network spawner is what is detecting when new players are joining, right? So we have on player joined, and if we are the server, then we want to report how many players we have. So let's do our multiplay service hosting handler dot instance set current number of players, and then we are going to take our runner active players dot count, which gives an error right now, and because we are missing a reference, and we need to cast it. That's what you do with this parenthesis into a ushort. And then we need to add on top here, so it actually uses our, or can find that, and that's because we have not added, I think, a link to this. So let's go and use system.link. All right, so then where are we? On player joined, and that error is gone. And then we need the same thing on player left, so it's not enough that we actually write out that player has left. Let's check if we are runner is server. Oops. Is server. Then let's update our player count. So whenever a player is either joining or leaving, then we are updating the player count. And then we are actually going to improve one more thing, and that's on shutdown. So on shutdown, let's extend this a little bit so that we can see what is going on. And so let's replace this with on shutdown reason, and then provide our shutdown reason so that we can see what is going on if we get on shutdown. Okay, now we can save that. Okay, so then we want to as well start using our arguments that we get from the server, so the region and some other things like port, etc. So let's go into utils and extend our utils so it can actually handle that, because we need to parse our command line to check what parameters have been provided to the game. So let's start with the region. So let's add a public stat string get regions from startup args. And well, of course, like everything else, there are multiple ways of doing this, but I'm gonna do it in the way that I think is easy. And we are just gonna check, okay, our system environment command line, does it contain region dash region EU? And if it does, then we are going to return EU. And then we need to write all of these different options. So if we have US, for instance, then let's do the same thing for US, return US. Then we need to return a default. So let's just add that. If nothing is found, then we need it to return something. So if no region is provided, we're going to write no server region provided defaulting to EU. And maybe we should write it in small letters because that's what it is. And then return EU. So let me just add all of these. Hold on. All right, so now I've added all of them. So we have Asia, China, Japan, EU, South America, and Korea, US, which is US East actually, and the US West. Of course, you could have read the region and then read the next parameter, but now I'm checking that it's exactly this. So we don't have any configuration issues later on. Alright, so that's enough for that. And then we need the same thing for our server port, because when we are running multiple instances of our server, then it will get different port numbers. So let's do a public static int get server port from startup args. And in this case, we can't do it this way because we don't know what port number it's going to get. So let's add a int port, which is going to be 0. And then we will take our system environment get command line args, which returns an array, a string array, and we're going to save it as command line args. And then we are going to loop through our command line args with a for loop. And then we are going to check if we have found our parameter, which is going to be our argument, which is going to be dash port. And if we found it, then it means that the port number is actually going to be in the next command line argument, because this is for each line, for each separate item in this list, it's going to be a new array. So it's going to be the next item in the array. So if we found port, then we expect the next thing to be the port number. So let's do a int try parse command line args, and then we'll take I plus 1 because that's the next item, and then out port. And then we can just write that to our debug log that we found the port argument and the port should be, etc. So this is just to make sure that we can see that it's picking up when we are launching the server. And then as well, we need to provide some default return. If this has failed, then we are going to return port anyway, which is going to be 0. Okay, so those are the things that we need to be able to sort of use our servers more efficiently. So then we need to use this. So let's go into our network runner handler and open that. And when we are starting up right now, if we are running in the editor, then we are going to use this auto-host or client, which is fine. But let's remove that so it will just use client if we are in the editor, so that we can try it and see what happens if server is not online when we are starting up. Okay, so then we want to start using our parameters, and here are the start game parameters, which provides this information. And what we need to do in this case is we are going to provide some app settings, or override the app settings that already exist. So let's add that. So we're going to do app settings and create a variable called app settings, and it's going to be photon settings.instance app settings. So that's going to get our app settings that is already stored in Photon Fusion. But we have this squiggly line because we have not added our using. There we go. Using Photon Fusion.photon real time. And that gets rid of our error there. And then the parameters that we are going to use is the region. So let's get our region first of all. So string fixed region, we're going to read it from utils, get regions from startup args. And for some reason, if it has not been coded properly, if it would be return empty, which it never should, but let's add a check for that anyway. So if the region fixed region is empty, and then let's just use it anyway. So that's a little bit strange. If it's not empty, then let's use it. So I actually misread my own code. So if the fixed region is not empty, then let's use whatever it gave us. And the same with port. So let's read in our port from our get server port from startup args. And then in this case, if the port is not 0, then we are going to use it. And then we need to actually provide these variables here. So let's add that. And that is the custom Photon app settings is going to be our app settings. Okay, perfect. So let's save that. Or actually, when I think about it, let's enhance our logging a little bit so we can see what is going on. So it just doesn't say initialize network runner done, but rather let's add with port, app settings, port using region, app settings, fixed region. So then we can see what is going on when we are checking the server logs. Okay, so let's save that and let's go into Unity. And now we want to use this integration, so let's create an empty game object, and it's going to use the Multiplay server hosting script, and let's call it Multiplay and server hosting handler, and then let's make it into a prefab, and then let's actually create a prefab from this, and let's create a folder called Multiplay. Our game here is actually using just one scene, so we don't need really to make a prefab from it, but it's sort of nice, so let's do it anyway. Okay, so now we can actually run this and see what happens. Alright, so then we can see that we are getting some type of error here, but let's focus on the good parts first. So we can see that our Unity services init OK, no server region provided, defaulting to EU, with port 0 using region EU. So it didn't get any information from us regarding the port, etc. But the network runner is started, and it is failing here because it couldn't load some test server JSON file that Multiplay is expected in order to sort of test your program, but it doesn't matter because we're gonna upload it anyway to our cloud server. So let's build this file, build settings, and then hit build. Select the folder where you want it to be. So I created a server build Linux here, and we're gonna call it agar clone linux server.x8664. All right, so let's save that and let it build, and then I'll get right back. So then our build is complete. So let's go into our Unity dashboard, and let's go into builds, and here we have our test build. So let's take files and update files, and then select delete all files and replace with new files. And we can actually probably just update the files, but I'll replace them anyway. Browse, folder upload, select our, no, not that one, clone and Linux, and actually let's remove the debug information because we don't need it. There we go, and select that folder, upload, 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 then wait for it to actually upload. So I'll pause that until it's actually done. All right, and there we are done with the upload files. Hit next and review confirm, so version will increase, and then we can select our rollout method, either progressive, which updates servers progressively, or we can just force it. So we're going to force it because we don't have any builds running anyway. So, and then hit finish. And now we can see, if we are looking at our build, we can see that the status is syncing. So while our build is syncing, then it means we can't actually use it until it's done. So let's wait for a few more minutes until that is done. So I'll get right back when that is done. All right, there we go. Syncing is ready. So we can now start testing it. So let's go into servers, grab the first one, and then let's start it and give it a little bit of time to actually start up. It's fairly quick actually. So let's have a look at our logs, and we can see that we have an engine log. So it looks like it does when we are starting it up regular from our computer, which is fine. And we have some errors, and then we found port argument. Port should be 9000. We are initializing our runner with port 9000 using region 0. And then we have our server network runner started, Unity services init OK, SQP server is started, so that's all good. So let's bring in a client and see what actually happens. So let me start up a client real quickly. And here we go. And let's make it a little bit smaller. There we go. And we are connected. So let's give us some name, Fedi. We have a quite good connection actually. It's a direct connection with a very low ping or RTT. So we have our Fedi going around here, and let's just bring in some other client. And monkey or whatever. Join game. Here we go. There's our other dude. And yeah, okay. Well, we had some overlapping. That's weird. So now we managed to die, which is all good. And if we look at our server, we can see analytics. It hasn't updated just yet. Let's see if we can refresh it and see if it actually updates. Not yet. About our overview. Did that update? And we have concurrent users 17. That's not today. So that's a bummer. We need to wait for it to update a little bit. Obviously it wasn't super fast. Here we go. Logs, concurrent users 2. So we have our users there, and we can bring in a third one. And I instantly died. Let's rejoin and just let's connect a few things. There, now it should have updated, hopefully. Let's see if it's faster this time. No, it's not, but it will update to 3 shortly. So this is all nice. We have a server and it can handle, I don't know actually how many users. We have to test that to see how efficient it is. But one problem that we have now is that, okay, we are running our server ID here with a specific IP number and a specific port. If we start up another one, like this one, go start, then just leave it for a little bit. And if we go into our logs now, we will see that, okay, we have everything seems to be up and running, but then we are getting an on shutdown, and the reason is server in room. So what happens now is that we are starting up another server running Photon Fusion, but our setup is only actually built for one server. So we have one room called test room or something. I don't even remember what it was. So what happens is that the second server is starting up. It will actually start to create a room, and it will find that, oh, this room, there is already a server in this room, so I will leave, because they cannot be 2 servers in the same room. So with that, we need to make some changes in our code to actually support running multiple servers, and the client needs to be able to handle that as well, to find a server and connect to it. So that's something that we can change in our code. So we need to add a few more startup arguments to be able to support multiple servers. So the first thing is that we need to provide a separate session ID so that each server can have its own session. So we will add another startup parameter where we feed this in. So we will do it in the same way that we have done with our the port. We will parse and look for server ID, and then our server ID will be in the next argument. So this will be something that we will add to our startup parameters. And also, while we are at it, we are going to add another one, which is going to be max players. So we want to be able to determine or change per server how many players it should be able to handle. And once it has reached its max limit, we want it to not accept new players. So in this case, we'll do it sort of in the same way that we have done with others. We are setting a max players to be 10, and then we are looking for that parameter. And if we find a parameter, we will use that value. And if we don't find any parameters, then at least we will accept 10 players. So this is something that you need to configure to suit your own game. So for this to work, we need to make some changes both in our client and our server, but we will start with the server. And the first thing we need to change is actually our network runner handler. So let's open that. And if we look at our code, we actually have a bit of a bug here. So when we were testing things before in the editor, actually things weren't working as we thought it would be. Because if you would switch into dedicated host mode, and you would have that build and you would run it in the editor, then it would execute this code first and say that, okay, I'm a client, and then it checks, are we an editor, which we have commented out this section of the code. So it will actually stop here. And then we have the second part, which is the else if Unity server. So it will check first, are we an editor? And secondly, are we a server? And in this case, it will run our Unity server in client mode, even though that we have changed our mode in the editor to be a headless server. So let's get rid of this part. So we are only going to care if we are a server or not. So if we have a client build, then we're going to execute this part. And if we are a headless server, then we are going to execute this part. And we need to have that so that it works. Okay, so the part where we want things to change is when we are initializing our network runner, we want this part to only happen if we are the server. So let's move this up here. And the reason is because when we are starting our network runner here, then it will try to join this test session room. And we only want that to happen on our servers, and it should actually take the name from the parameters, the startup parameters. But the client should start to look if there are any available servers instead of just joining the first one, because it could be full or maybe it does not exist because we are not sure what server ID we should connect to. So we're going to leave this and just initialize the runner if we are a client. And what we can do as well is we can change our start method into be an async, like we have done before. And then we'll add a wait before our initialize network runner. So then our code here will actually wait until that's done. And then we'll add our debug log here, server network runner started. Then we need to change our initialized network runner. So after we've provided our port here, let's do the same thing for the server ID. So we'll get it from our startup args, and if we don't have a server ID, we're going to use the session name provided here, so that we can still do testing and things like that. And let's add to our debug log initialize network runner on server ID, and then provide a server ID with the port and our region. That gives us some information of what's going on. And while we are changing these things, we need to make sure that our clients can see the different servers, and we are going to use the lobby system for this. So Photon Fusion has a lobby system that allows it to display which server sessions are available. So we are going to add a custom lobby name called custom lobby name default. So we're going to have a default sort of queue of servers where clients can see and join those games. And actually we need to change our session name here because we are now using server ID as our session name. So let's change that, otherwise it will use the test server. Then we need to work on using our max player parameter. So we want our server to be able to open the session or close the session dependent on how many users there are. So if we look at our on play joined here, we want to add a check for that. So let's do that. So we will see that, okay, if our runner has an active player count of larger or equal to the max players, then we should close that session. So it shouldn't be available for new clients to connect when that happens. And the same goes for on player left. So we want to make sure that if a player has left and the server is closed, then we want to open it. So let's do the reverse check. If the player count is less than max players, then we will open it. Then let's feed in the same information in our Multiplay server handler here. So we have our max player count, which we are providing here, startup, and the first parameter is how many maximum players we should have. So let's use that, and we will provide our get maximum players from the startup args, and we will cast it into a U-short so that we don't get any errors. Okay, so those should be the only changes that we need to make on the server side. Then we need to make some changes for the client as well. I already updated the build, but we need to update the build configuration. So let's press edit and add the new parameters. So we're going to use server ID and $$ to get the variable server ID, which contains the ID of the server. And we'll put max players to 2, so we can see that it actually has a limit of 2 players and that we can use multiple servers. Then let's just start up one of the servers. Start server. And then let's wait a second, and then let's look at our engine log, and we can see that, okay, we are up and running, and we have a server ID, which is the correct one, and port 9000. So now we can bring in some clients. So bring in one client and let that connect. So connecting to server, and then let's bring in another client, which should also connect to the server, and then a third client, which should actually fail to connect, because or it should fail to find an open server, because we already have 2 clients. And as we can see, it's not actually connecting. So that's good. Let me just move them out and then bring up a new server. So here we go, and start server. So now our extra client here should find that server, and it did, and the other 2 are also running, and we should be able to bring up another server, or another client, sorry. And that will also connect. There we go. I'd like to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. It helps us with every single contribution that we can get. So please consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description. This concludes this episode, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and the bell to get a notification when the next video is out.